All right, so here we are, another session of Coffee with the Founder. Got my coffee and also another phenomenal colleague and guest with us today. Dare I say a true brother in the struggle, Stephen Jones. Uh, uh, Brother Jones, we are doing these coffee talks as a way to just introduce people to the community and network of folks associated with myself and the White Privilege Conference. So I'm happy that you've been able to join us. I'd like you to start just by introducing yourself. Who is Stephen Jones? And kick us off by giving us a sense of the work and research and good stuff that you're doing, not only nationally, but globally.
You got it. Excellent. Well, thank you for having me, Brother Moore. It is truly an honor, and I am a fan and an admirer, and from one true brother to another. I really appreciate the work that you have done over the years. So I want to start off by uplifting you, because I think that's just really key. I am the CEO of Jones. We are a diversity, leadership development, and organizational change consulting firm. We get a chance to work with companies around the world, from Toyota and Honda to the NBA and CBS, now Viacom CBS, to Edward Life Sciences, who has offices in Singapore and Costa Rica and countries around the world. I think Viacom CBS has companies in 150 countries, as well as working with universities, community colleges, and K through 12 schools, which is where we got connected through the White Privilege Conference, as well as NEIS, POCC, and a number of other places. And I'll tell you, my personal mission that I've been able to build into the company's mission is to develop leaders and organizational systems that counter oppression through diversity, inclusion, and organizational excellence. And so that's what we do. We've been in existence for 32 years. I started when I was 10, child mom and everything.
Yeah, bro, you've been at it a while. So I want to ask you about that time that you've been grinding. What's your sense of how the work has changed, how the work is doing, the impact as you look at, K-12, higher ed, and even corporations? What's your sense of how the work of diversity and inclusion is doing?
Yeah. It's interesting. It's been a journey over time. I think, the first, earlier, as we say, back in the day, there was a lot of focus on awareness, right? Do you know you have a stereotype? Do you know how that stereotype is impacting you? Folks evolved, and the work evolved from there to, do you have skills? Right? And do you have the skills to lead inclusively? Do you have the skills to manage your biases? Then I saw the work kind of shift to organizational, right? How do we build inclusive schools, inclusive companies? And then we elected President Obama, and everybody thought we were in a post-racial society, right? And the field of unconscious bias, kind of cropped up. And so people were moved to, and the work moved to, do you know how to manage your brain? Do you understand the way your brain works from a neuroscience perspective, right? And then I would say there's this focus on privilege, right? That says whether you're aware of it or not, the groups that we belong to afford us unearned privilege. And that privilege gets institutionalized, is historical, supported, creates disparities, so on and so forth, right? And so what I see today is work that's being done and continued at the individual awareness and skill level, work that's looking at intergroup, right, levels, and how, especially in the COVID-19, as we look at the health disparities that are impacting Black and Brown people differently and more, impacting our communities more than many other communities. And so there's some intergroup lenses that we have to continue to look at. And then there's the institutional, which is, again, those systems level impact. And that's why we talk a lot about people have to learn to see in 3D, right? At the individual, cultural, and institutional levels. And so I believe the work is consistent and more complex at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Now, it seems as you've gone through that timeline, different organizations, institutions seem to have decided to embrace and do the work as well, i.e. corporations.
Yep.
Although some still, I think, have some skepticism when it comes to corporations. I mean, are they just doing kumbaya, fluffy kind of old school stereotypes, so to speak? What's your sense? Are the corporations you're working with, or where do you sit on the corporate network and playing field, are they really pushing around these issues, or is it just fluff?
Yeah, actually, I think in many ways, many corporations are further ahead than many educational institutions. And I say that because for corporations, they're looking at the business bottom line. And so in terms of the business case for diversity, there's a lot of research. There's Diversity Inc. puts out a top 50 best companies for diversity. They're looking at supplier diversity. These corporations make millionaires when they give minority businesses a contract, right? These corporations, now let me say, there's a long way towards many corporations getting it right? But in terms of those corporations that are leading in the field of diversity, there's another initiative called the CEO Commitment to Diversity, where over 500 CEOs have made a pledge to ensure that they are doing unconscious bias training, that they are sharing best practices, and that they are looking at and holding places for the real conversations about diversity to happen, right? So I think in terms of the corporate space, there are many, many companies that are like far ahead. At the same time, just like for what we see as consistent across education, universities, right? K through 12, universities, corporations, nonprofits, representation, right? So when you look at having diversity at your senior level, your board level, that is a challenge across industries, right? Across the board, because so many people are still hiring people who are similar to them, right? And that becomes the challenge. So I would say what we see is across industry, many organizations have a long way to go. And there are organizations that are leading the trail across all of those industries as well. We very much so stay away from companies that are doing that check the box piece, because I think that does exist. And we say if it feels like window dressing, or if you're not interested in real change, then we're not the company to work with you.
Yeah, I like that. I want to come back to that, the fact that you do the work like you do, committed to change, which sometimes may cost you a contract as get you a contract. I want to come back to that, but first I want to ask you, is this what you envisioned growing up? I mean, how did we get here? Jones Consulting, is this what you grew up thinking, this is what I want to do?
Man, I was going for the first Black president. Obama beat me to it. You know what I'm saying? So I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that, you know. No, when I was a kid, Look, my first day of preschool, and actually it was kindergarten. The first day, I grew up in a small town in Louisiana. First day in the class, the teacher asked all the black kids to raise their hand. And we raised our hand and she took a count because we were one of the first classes to be integrated and one of the youngest classes. So I knew as a kid that this concept of race and differences made a difference. She didn't explain why she asked us to raise our hands. I grew up with a Black Catholic church that I attended, and within a mile away, there was a white Catholic church that we couldn't go to, right? There was a Black funeral home, a white funeral home, Black cemetery, white cemetery. So race growing up in the South, in my experience, we could only go, my grandmother would take us to the city pool on Wednesdays because they cleaned the pool on Thursdays. And that was the time that we were able to go. And the only time that Black kids could go, and I could go on, right, with examples. And so when I was younger, I used to think, you know what, I'm gonna create a pill. And you can take this pill and be any color that you want to, any day of the week. And that way color wouldn't matter. Because if people could step in each other's skin, they would realize that there's not a whole lot of differences. As I grew older, I realized there was a lot of differences, right, in the way we were treated, but not a lot of differences in terms of us being humans.
Yeah. You know, Gladwell talks about 10,000 hours. I mean,
Yes.
really, that being what you need to put in to be at the highest level of your profession.
Yeah.
And I would, out of doubt, join any law firm's team to argue the case that this is one of the organizations and the organizational leaders at the top of the game. But when did you feel it? When did you feel like, you know what, I can do this thing, and then expand it in the way you did? Because sometimes folks stay in a kind of holding pattern, and it's hard to really break out and expand and do it on your own. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to that point?
It's such a great question, Doc. I earlier in my career, I was working at San Diego State University, and a mentor of mine, Lillian Roybal Rose, she said to me, she said, look, as you manage your career, know that there are skills you need to learn as you increase your influence. And at the time I was like, wow, what do you mean? She says, well, it's important to learn the skills when you go from local leadership to state leadership. And when you go from state leadership to regional leadership, from regional to national, national to global, right? She says there's a language, there's a skill set, there's a way of thinking and understanding systems at all of those different levels. So I took that seriously when she said it. And earlier in my career, I would test certain ideas in New York and then test those same ideas in Miami, and they didn't work, right? Because the regional culture of New York was different than the regional culture of Miami, right? And so over those years, to your point, and those 10,000 hours, right? Part of what I consciously worked on was understanding what is it that causes people to get the points that we want them to get, right? To understand that unearned privilege, to understand how their identities influence who they are. Because earlier in my career, man, we used to want to make people cry. You know, like they ain't getting it if they're not crying, right? And then we realized that in so many ways, people would start crying and stop learning, right? And so we saw the emotion, but then we didn't see the learning. Yet we knew affective learning is a key part of cognitive, affective, emotional cognitive, affective, behavioral learning, right? And so we really worked over the years to put together a process that created all three modes of learning. in a way that left people feeling empowered and inspired to learn more.
Yeah.
And to own their stuff and not avoid their stuff, right? And not assume that because I understand racism, that means I understand sexism or that I understand homophobia, right? And so we really worked to put a system together that worked across the country. And then we tested the system across industries. So the way we talk about it in education is different than nonprofits, is different than in corporations, right? So we did a lot of work really constructing that. But then to your point, we went global and landed in Thailand with Edwards Life Sciences, where it wasn't about black and brown and white. It was about, I said Thailand, sorry, it was Singapore. Because in Singapore, it was, are you Singapore Malay? Are you Singapore Thai? Are you Singapore Indian? Are you Singapore other? Right? And so we had to understand the differences that make a difference in different countries. Right? And then understand how socioeconomic plays out in those countries. And that helped us grow a global lens. Right? So that with the NBA, we did training in Johannesburg and London. Right? And in Johannesburg, the NBA there was looking at, I think it's 54 countries in Africa. So they were looking at how do they deliver, right, and do their work across countries, across tribes, across languages, across all of those differences. So the skill that we talk about is which differences make a difference, right? And where does privilege, power, and oppression play out in the Czech Republic, different than it plays out in Costa Rica, different than it plays out in Texas.
Yeah, yeah. Now, we talked a little bit about how you do the work, because, I mean, some folks can get folks to sing Kumbaya, and that will get them paid and keep them employed a long time.
Yeah.
And that's just not Jones Consulting.
That's right.
And what I've learned, doing the work sometimes and pushing folks, not to necessarily get them to cry and feel demeaned, but to really get them understanding that it's about expansion, growth, evolution.
Yep.
That can take a toll on you. So I'm wondering, how do you take care of yourself as someone who's committed to doing the work, committed to organizational change, structural change, individual change? Because sometimes that can take a toll.
Yeah, man. My hair used to be black. So, I had salt and pepper. The pepper left. It's just all salt. I think there are a couple of things that I do to take care of myself. One of those is laughter. I think laughter is a real key medicine, right? And it keeps me practicing humility and not taking myself so seriously or too seriously, right? Because that which lives in other people lives in me, right? So staying vigilant at checking my own privilege, checking my own biases, and doing that self-work is part of self-care, right? That's one part. Second, I ride horses. So we have horses out here in San Diego, and I'll tell you, you want to be humbled, try to control a horse. Because the horse will let you know it is more powerful than you are, right? But also the horse reflects the emotions of the rider. So when I'm working with the horses, I have to stay calm and centered so they stay calm, right? If I'm agitated, I'll watch one of our horses is named Chance. I'll watch Chance get agitated. And I'm like, what's wrong with her? And then I'm like, what's wrong with you? And I have to calm myself down.
Right.
And that's part of how I I relax. And then lastly, I love going to the movies, man,
Yeah.
because it's just you get to just relax and kind of take in,
Yeah.
right, the movies. So staying and then practicing that humility, I think, is just a real key part. And then turn it off. So I'm not someone who stays on all the time, but really, just kind of, I love just fading into the background.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm going to come back and ask you about some movie selections, TV selections, because we're
You got
collecting
it.
a list. So we'll end that
Okay.
way. But I got a couple more things I want to get at you about. Number one is COVID-19. I think
Yeah.
for me, there's been a lot of talk about how people are doing, how organizations are doing. What I want to ask you about is leadership, right? What's your sense if a leader or leaders are watching, listening to this? What's your recommendation? What's your advice to them? What should leaders be doing during this time? Because I think that they have a different role to play when things
Yeah.
like this happen.
Yeah.
What's your advice to any leaders listening about how to be handling and dealing with this time?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think so many things are changing based on this COVID-19, right? Like some of our core beliefs. We used to say, right, you've heard people say, you spend more time at work than you do at home. Not no more. Right? You spend
I
more time
resemble
with
that
people.
remark. Yes.
You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple of concrete things. I think
Yeah.
one, leaders have to show people that they care, right? So having conversations about understanding people's current reality as they're working at home. Do they have kids that they're now the surrogate teacher for, right? Do they have parents or grandparents that they're having to take care of? Like we now have to understand that people used to talk about work-life balance, right? That means something totally different today. So I think the first part is people need, you've heard Dr. Maya Angelou's quote, who said, people may not remember what you say to them, but they will remember how you make them feel,
Mm.
right? She said it better than I just did, but it's that idea of demonstrating that you care for people during this time, I think is just one of the key concepts. The second is communicating clear expectations. So I think every week leaders should communicate, here's what we're going to be focusing on this week. Or if they can, here's what I need you individually to prioritize this week, right? So having that conversation with your direct reports so that people can understand how their performance is being measured by what expectations their leader has of them. I think that's second. Third is we bring our biases into this virtual environment,
Mm.
right? And so leaders still have to do the work of managing their privilege and managing their biases. I'll give you a quick example. One leader, Latina, I was talking to her and she said she's an educator, administrator. She was on a call with a number of administrators from across the country. She was the only Latina on the call. The facilitator heard someone speaking Spanish, called her name out and asked her to mute her computer. She said to the person, I'm not sure why you called my name. I'm in a room by myself, right? The facilitator assumed that the conversation was, the noise, if you will, was coming out of her computer, her voice. And she's like, no. She had a conversation with the facilitator after the call was over saying, you made some assumptions, right? And you need to check your bias. Another call, someone was telling me that they were on a call with caregivers, right? Folks who were going out into the community, taking care of the underserved, underrepresented. And one of the leaders says on the call, I feel like the black fat kid in the movie. right? So we're bringing our biases into this virtual reality, and we still have to do the work of checking our biases and being aware and inviting people to give us feedback when they hear our biases in action. And then the third piece, I think, is over communicating, or maybe that's the fourth. Leaders have to over communicate with their employees, repeat things multiple times. And then lastly, I would say, don't expect perfection, right? We're figuring out this technology. Many people are having to teach online for the first time. Many people are having to figure out WebEx and Zoom and GoToMeeting or whatever technology they're using. And we have to be patient with the learning curve. And I think those are some tips specifically for leaders as well.
Yeah, I'm sure this happens to you quite often. I'm wondering how you respond. People see you, social media, they see you making it happen, see what you're doing, and they think, oh, how can I do that? How can I be, all right? So I'm wondering, what's your sense of blood, sweat, and tears is taken to get the Jones consultant?
Ah,
And what's your
there's a
advice to young persons, young people asking that question?
yeah. I think about Dr. King and Nike. Dr. King, when I was in college, man, I would wake up and listen to speeches of Dr. King as I was ironing my clothes, because you got to get a crease in the jeans when
Right.
you roll. Right. And he has a famous speech that says, when the doors of opportunity open, you're going to have to burn the midnight oil. Right. I am up at 4:30 every morning. And so by 12:30, I've put in an 8-hour day. I'm reading. I'm watching TikTok videos. I am educating myself. I am meditating for 30 minutes. I am returning emails. I'm holding early calls on the East Coast with clients and clients in other time zones. And so for me, that idea of being up early and making sure that I'm in a continuous learning mode. And that's what I would say to people starting out, to make sure that you are continuously learning, growing, improving. Somebody also told me early in my career, they said, pick three topics that you can build you build yourself as a subject matter expert. You may have more topics that you can, deliver on, help people learn and develop on, but pick three initially and get really good at those three, and get so good that people ask you to pay you to help them understand. Right? Don't be mediocre, right? Don't even be good or great. Be so good that folks call you up and go, I need your brain. I need your help to think through this problem, to come up with the best solutions, right? My entire career has been based on focus on doing the right work, the right way to produce the right results, right? For the clients we're working with, right? And I'll tell you just real quickly, Doc, someone said we were getting testimonials, and I remember a leader who said, Jones won't tell you what you want to hear. Jones will tell you what you need to hear, whether you want to hear it or not. Right? So don't be afraid to speak truth to power. Right? Which is another part. And I'll go back to your point. Many consultants, people hire consultants, and many consultants will tell clients what they think the client wants to hear to get more contracts. Right? Our focus is we're going to speak the truth. That's our only client. Right? And that's what we bring based on our best thinking, the data we have, the information we have, the understanding we have. Nike. The Nike part is if you're starting out in your career, just do it. Like get a card, right? Volunteer. If you're an independent contractor, get subcontracted by other, companies and partner with and collaborate with other independent contractors. You got to get your 10,000 hours in, right? To develop your own style, your own approach. Just do it, right? And that for me is what I would say to folks. And don't. I wrote a book called Journey to Excellence, and in the book I talk about the difference between perfection versus excellence. Excellence is about learning from mistakes. Perfection, not making a mistake. Perfection is not possible, but we can get better all the time, right? And so don't expect perfection. Shoot for excellence.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you mentioned publication. It makes me want to ask, what's next for Stephen Jones? What's on the horizon as you look at the next 10 years of
Yes.
your work, of your organization? I mean, what's next? What's cooking? What are you thinking about as you look ahead?
Yeah, yeah. So I mentioned the horses. We are building an equine assisted leadership development program where we're going to help folks learn how to be effective leaders by working with horses.
Mm,
Because the horse will only follow a leader that it respects and a leader that it thinks will keep it safe, right? That's true for horses. That's true for people.
mm.
Right. And so that's one thing that we're really excited about. The second thing that's part of the future is we're launching the Jones School of Inclusive Leadership. And excuse me, we have a coaching and retreat center out here in Rancho Santa Fe, San Diego, Southern California, where we're going to be hosting 3 to 5 day, what we call leadership intensives, where we're going to be bringing a group of, and we're keeping it small, 15 people who will spend an intensive 3 to 5 days together, working to transform themselves and transform their leadership, right? We know that there are big conferences out there. We send folks to the white privilege conference all the time and say, come out, this is the place for you to go to get that information, to network, so on and so forth. We find that there's also a need for people to have that more intimate learning experience, right? Where people can be vulnerable, take risks. We've held a Strategic Diversity Institute for independent schools where we've had directors of diversity for independent schools across the country come to San Diego, spend 4.5 days together. They leave with a diversity action plan for their school for the next year.
Gotcha.
Right? And they get that coaching there. And then the last thing I would say is we're going to continue to grow global. And so my goal is within the next 10 years for sure to have locations in about at least 3 different countries. Because my vision is to create a firm that counters oppression that's the size of a Booz Allen or a Deloitte. That's where we're going.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I am just, man, so proud of you, bro. When I met you, you were grinding. I mean, on the grind, blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah,
And
buddy.
and I know you're still grinding, but it's just nice to see, some of what you're intending coming to fruition. And I have no doubt that those plans are going to be real, and look forward to continuing to collaborate and
Yeah.
partner with you. As long as you'll have us, we'd love to be in cooperation with you.
Consider it done. Absolutely.
Let me just 2 quick things.
Yep.
One, how are you doing, man? This COVID-19, how are you doing in reference to just really having to essentially, at least from the travel, stop?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
I'm wondering if I feel like the nation has had to stop. And it gives us a chance to kind of look at the nation. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
wondering, like, what's your perspective? What's your reading on America today after we spent almost 30 plus days just really having to pause and take a look at what COVID-19 is saying about our country?
Yeah. Yeah. So powerful, man. I think there are a lot of people in America and around the world who are, one, evaluating their own worth and their own identity. Because for so many people, what we do is who we are,
Mm.
right? And because the country has stopped and people have been told stay home, right? Then, what I'm saying is what I've heard from conversations with clients around the country, where we've heard leaders say, I'm wondering what's my real value to my organization? Because I'm not as busy as I used to be. Am I essential?
Mm.
Right? So that's one part. I think people are reevaluating their identity, their purpose, and having to decide whether they like themselves and the people who are in the houses with them. You know what I'm saying? Right? And so I think there's a lot of reevaluation that's happening. I saw a post that says, relationships that are on the path to divorce, right? Like, and so for me, I think that's one part, is reevaluating relationship with self, relationship with others, right? I think the second part is, there are so many ways that we have inherited structures: the 5-day work week, the 2-day weekend, right? For some people, we know it's a 7-day work week, right? Um, and so, given that those structures are blown up, we drop the kids off to school, we pick them up at 3 o'clock. We have compartmentalized our world and our lives, and all of that has gotten blown up by COVID-19.
Mm.
And so many people are having to recreate those structures, right? And I think that's taken a lot of energy. And so people are drained, many people are depressed, and people are not aware, I think, that that structure has created comfort for a lot of people, right? And has created ease of mind for a lot of people. And so now, I was talking to someone, I said, what day is it? They said it's daylight, right? Because a day seems like a week, and and we don't have the same clock, if you will, that's keeping us going. So I think that's another part that is happening in COVID-19. I think the COVID-19 is also, once again, as many global tragedies have given light to the inequities and the disparities that are both historical and present day, right? From the health disparities in the Black and Brown communities, and as I mentioned earlier, and even the concept of social distancing. Well, if I'm in a neighborhood or in a house or a part of the world where, because of my socioeconomics, I don't have room to social distance, right? Then that social distancing is a privilege that folks are asking me to do, that's not part of my reality, right? And then I think lastly, for me, it's one of my biggest fears, which I see happening, is the politicization, right? Bringing politics into this whole process. And I think that, to me, is a recipe for disaster, because it's going to cause us to have, many more people who die, many more people who are negatively impacted than is necessary, right? And to me, it reminds us, when you've heard, Doc, of the butterfly effect,
Yeah.
right? People say, right, there's no question today around whether we are connected globally and whether that's real, because somebody did something in Wuhan, China, that is now causing us to have to stay home, right? And so if we never realized that we are one family before and connected, then we should now. And unfortunately, like many families, there's the favorite child, there's the smart child, there's the troubled child, and unfortunately, we are not. I think again the inequities just continue to play out, and this COVID gives light to that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, Doc. It's a tall order. It's a different time, and I think
Yeah.
it's really important. The world has folks like you
Mm,
being positive, being productive,
mm.
because folks are facing some real difficult and different times, and
Yeah,
there's going to be work to do now and forevermore, as,
that's right.
as we've heard over time. So thank you again, because I know you got a lot going on, and you're a busy person, and we appreciate you coming on. We want to end in a fun way and get back to your
You
movie
got it.
watching habits.
Okay, you got
What
it.
have you seen, Doc? What's your recommendation? Anything you learned or watched that you learned something from, or anything that you've enjoyed that's just taken you away that you would recommend to everybody?
um, I'm trying to think about the last movie that I saw. But some of my favorites are like I just watched Uncorked. Um, watched what's another movie that I watched? I'm drawing a blank right now. Yeah,
Is there anything else you've seen, you've seen on Netflix or Prime
yeah,
or Hulu that you would recommend some of those kinds of
yeah,
films? Because that seems to be what a lot of people are turning to because nobody can go to
yeah.
the movies now.
That's right. That's right. I've seen All American,
Okay.
which is an interesting series. Have you seen it?
I
About
know
a
of it. Yes, yes.
yeah, young African American high schooler, young man who was kind of adopted by a white family so he could go to a private independent school. And it shows the impact of socioeconomic diversity. And he grew up in Crenshaw, I think, and it's set in LA. And it shows the dynamics that plays out across race and class and gender and a whole bunch of different dynamics there. Ozark is another one that I'm watching. I'm a Marvel's fan, so The Runaways is another one. It's sci-fi, um, and those are a couple
Yeah,
that I've been watching. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So I've been recommending, if you haven't
Hmm.
already, the new series with Kerry Washington and Reese Witherspoon.
Yes,
So have you seen this or taken a
little
peek at it?
fires everywhere.
Whew. Yeah, I know it's. I feel like we're back in good times days. I can't wait
Yes.
till the next episode, which is tonight. So okay, you're on to that one. I've also been
Absolutely.
sharing Unorthodox, which is
Ah,
another series that came out on Netflix that I just kind of stumbled on.
okay.
That I'll just say had me in many ways looking at religion, looking at faith, looking at assimilation,
Ah,
looking at relationships. I mean, it was a
yeah,
real learning opportunity, but also there were some enjoyable moments too. So that's one
yeah,
I would recommend for you. But thank you for your recommendations.
yeah,
Runaways, I hadn't seen that, so I have to take a peek at
yeah.
that. Being a
Absolutely.
Marvel fan myself, but um, again, Doc, I appreciate you, man. I'm looking forward to collaboration, and I've always appreciated your support. And
Hmm.
take care of yourself, bro. Be safe. And I'm sending you a virtual hug, Wakanda style, here from Green Bay. And I look forward to seeing you face to face to give you a real one on site.
You got it. And let me say, Dr. Moore, I have nothing but respect and appreciation for the work that and the leadership that you have done have provided, the work of the white privilege community, right? Because I know you've got institutes and you've got conferences, and you change lives, man, and change systems. And so I really appreciate that.
Appreciate you, bro. Take care of yourself.
All
Peace.
right.
Peace.
Take care.